And welcome to this episode of Secure Your Creation podcast. I am Craig Andrews, and this is Mario Milano, my co-host. Today, we're going to be talking about something that's actually very true and dear to Mario, which is talking about counterfeiting. Counterfeiting is a very important aspect of IP because it's something he has to constantly keep an eye on. So, Mario, welcome, and let's get into this. So, kind of give me an understanding of what counterfeiting is in the IP space.
Yeah. So counterfeiting is typically when somebody tries to pass the goods of another person, when they try to pass the goods off as their own. So we see a lot of times people want to counterfeit, goods that have a high profitability. You can think of like designer handbags, things like that. People want the materials required to make something like that are not that much, but the brand behind the designer bag is worth a lot of money. So by passing your goods off as a high-end designer handbag, the profit margin can be great. And so when you're counterfeiting, you just want to capitalize on the brand name of somebody else and pass their goods off as your own.
And so you mentioned the brands in terms of fashion brands. Are there other industries that are vulnerable to counterfeiting?
Yeah, we've seen counterfeiting in a lot of different areas. One of the some of the more dangerous aspects are, they can even be dangerous to your health, right? Like you think about fake drugs or fake lotions or things like that, things that either you're ingesting or you're applying to your body topically. That can lead to sickness, death, because if it's a counterfeit drug, there's no FDA regulation there. It's just somebody else is cooking up whatever drug or lotion that they want to counterfeit. And, hopefully it meets the same standards that the FDA applies, but, it might not. And in that situation, I mean, not only is the counterfeiter stealing the profits and revenue of the actual brand owner, but, they're putting everyone at risk.
Wow. And I didn't even think about it from the drug perspective. Are there other industries that maybe exist? Like, so for instance, just the other day, my wife and I, we went to CVS and saw kind of, as seen on TV. And I'm going, wait a minute, that thing is no different than this, but it's just here. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that can certainly happen in all industries. I like the as seen on TV commercials. They're usually pretty entertaining, energetic, to say the least. And so these products, they'll just copy whatever they see that's out there. And it could be any industry. I've seen it in electronics. We've all seen it in electronics, right? You go on Amazon or eBay and you're looking for a phone charger. And, the official Apple charger, that might be $30. Or you can see the one that's right next to it that basically looks the same for $10. And so, sometimes you buy the $10 one and hope it doesn't blow up your phone or catch fire, but sometimes it does. And I saw it a lot when the hoverboards had first come out, and the hoverboards were really popular. And, they were some of the counterfeit ones. Not only were they directly copying competitors' goods, but they were also using cheaper components inside of it. So, that was leading to fires, explosions, and, you can see how that would be dangerous.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so taking that case in terms of like an Apple to your example, there's a lot of companies that rely on research and development to grow their business. Give me an idea of the impact of counterfeiting against a company who relies on research and development.
Yeah, that's one thing that a lot of people might not appreciate is that the R&D money has to come from somewhere, right? And so these companies that have a long R&D cycle that takes a while to develop a new product, make it profitable, make it safe for everybody to use, that takes a lot of R&D, takes a lot of money. And so once they finally start selling their product and making money, that's what is going to pay for the R&D for the next product. And so when we have people that are out there counterfeiting, that's stealing the profitability of the R&D cycle. So number one, the company isn't going to have as much money to pour into the next round of products. And number two, it's going to discourage the big companies from even trying to do any R&D, because they'll look at it and say, well, why should we spend all the money for the R&D? Why don't we just wait for somebody else to, come up with a great new product? And then we can just use our economies of scale because we're a large company and make whatever products cheaper, faster, and, find some improvements to do it. And so what I see is instead of taking that approach, which nobody would appreciate, I see companies, larger companies, end up, they file for intellectual property protection, and then they can go to something like the International Trade Commission when counterfeit goods are coming from outside the U.S. The ITC, as it's called, will once you have your registered intellectual property, the ITC will then look at any goods that are coming into the country, and if it's a counterfeit and it's infringing your intellectual property, the ITC will hold on to it until everything gets sorted out. And so, it's a very effective way of preventing counterfeit goods from coming into the country. It's also helpful that, if somebody is infringing your intellectual property in the U.S., you send them a cease and desist letter, you file a lawsuit against them, you try to enforce your patent that way. It could take a little while. If it's coming from outside the U.S. and the ITC seizes it, it's just a much quicker process. And even the whole enforcement mechanism at the ITC is a lot more rapid than it is for other types of proceedings. So, if you are a company that is having your products imported, or you think that your competitors might be importing their products, which is pretty common for a lot of manufacturers, then you definitely want to have your intellectual property squared away and, be familiar with the process at the ITC.
Wow. So one of the things that we talked about as well is you referenced the larger companies, right? So those companies that out there that might be saying, "Hey, get your trademark for $100, or get your something for 250," something very simple. How is a small business guy who might be looking at that? What is advantages legally do they have?
Yeah, so those deals seem pretty good, right? It's a very low price, and all of a sudden you can get a trademark. Unfortunately, with like a lot of things in life, it's not quite that simple as far as getting a valuable trademark. Those types of companies that are offering these really low prices, they're not going to do any of the background work or any of the legwork before filing the trademark, which is crucial if you're going to be launching a new brand. And the background work is really, conducting a search and making sure that nobody else has a trademark, making sure that you're not going to be infringing anybody else's trademark, and making sure that your trademark is going to be registerable. Because when we're going to be filing a trademark and we do that search, we look at all the other trademarks that are out there, whether they're pending applications or registered marks, and we determine, we have a pretty good idea of whether your mark is going to be registerable or not. And so once we go ahead and file it, we feel pretty confident that you're going to be able to make sure you get through. The worst thing is, you go to one of those companies, you file your trademark for very cheap. Then you find out, close to a year later, number one, your trademark is not registerable. And number two, you're getting a cease and desist letter from somebody else saying, you have to stop using that name because you're infringing our trademark. Now you have to go through a whole rebranding process, apply for another trademark, which can certainly cost you a lot of time, energy, and money. So, you have to be careful when you're going with those types of companies. They're not doing any of the background work. That's going to be all on whoever's coming up with the trademark and paying them to file it for them. They're really just, I'll take what you give me, I'll file it for you with the USPTO, and that's all I'm going to do.
So ultimately, what you're trying to say is you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
You really get what you pay for. So my next question here relies on the obviously development of technology. So in an e-commerce space, in a technology space like 3D printing, you mentioned before in reference to cheaper components, but 3D printing is here to stay for sure.
Yeah.
How do you see in your space where 3D printing and patents come into play?
Yeah, so 3D printing has really changed everything as far as manufacturing is concerned. Maybe 25, 30 years ago, maybe more, if you wanted to counterfeit something, you had to look at a product, see all the components that make up that product, and then either, find a way to make the parts for it. And, first you had to measure each part and get all the dimensions and everything like that, and then figure out, make each part and then assemble the whole thing. Then as time went on, then they started to get, 2-dimensional scanners and then 3-dimensional scanners, which made it very easy to determine the exact measurements and what size all the parts were. And then now that we have 3D printing, now you can take your 3D scanner, you have this component, you put it under the 3D scanner, you see what size it is and everything like that. You take that information, hand it over to the 3D printer, and that can just print out that product. So, it went from a couple weeks or a couple months to get a counterfeit product, to now, a couple hours, and you could have a counterfeit product ready to go.
And so now let's turn it to a little bit more economic. So from having your patent, let's say you're a business owner and you have a patent that you have now registered and is fully available. Tell me about the tax implications of having a counterfeit out there. I know you're not an accountant, but have you had any studies or case studies that you've experienced in terms of that?
Yeah. So one of the immediate things that we see when a counterfeit product enters the market is the profit margin on the actual good is going to go down, right? You get a patent, you have a monopoly on your product, you can charge as much as the market will bear for your product. And so profit margins are usually pretty high. And that's the trade-off that the USPTO says, look, if you file your patent application, you teach everybody how to do it, you get this monopoly on your product for 20 years, and you can charge as much as you want. And so, you're charging higher prices if you want. Then the counterfeit comes on the market. Now, all of a sudden, you have to reduce your price in order just to compete with the counterfeit product. And so, again, like we said with the R&D cycle and everything, once the counterfeit is out there, your profit margins are going to go down, and then you're just not going to have as much money for your future activities.
That makes sense. And everything ties together. It's sort of like the Lion King, right? The circle of life. It all ties together
Yeah.
in a function of how one thing works with another and help increase the size of your business. And the valuable piece of it is having that patent makes your business even more valuable if you're looking to grow your business.
Yeah.
So just for the people in the back, right? Quote unquote, the people in the back, or the listeners listening in the back. Give me a clear definition of the difference between the counterfeiting and the IP infringement.
Yeah. So to me, counterfeiting is where you're just blatantly copying somebody else's product and trying to pass it off as your own. Counterfeiting is something that in trademarks, we would see that a lot, where somebody's just copying the exact same Louis Vuitton logo and slapping it on a handbag and trying to sell that as their own. Intellectual property infringement, there's other flavors of it. Some of it isn't quite as nefarious. People aren't doing it on purpose. Somebody has a widget and, it has a patent on it. You come out with a competing widget. You don't copy the exact design, but you want to get something close because you want to do kind of the same thing. Sometimes, you do run afoul there, and it ends up being something that would infringe somebody else's patent, but you're not necessarily doing it on purpose. And also, the thing with patents is it doesn't matter if you know that somebody else's patent is out there or not. So sometimes you end up infringing somebody else's patent just because you haven't done a patent search, which of course I recommend that you do a patent search before you release any new products. But if you didn't do a patent search, you might be infringing somebody else's patent without being aware of it. To me, counterfeiting is like, we know that other thing is out there, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to copy that exact product and have other people think that, the product that we're selling is from the actual brand owner.
Mm-hmm. And I know that in a lot of situations, especially going forward, technology is moving so fast that you might be in a position where you're potentially infringing somebody who just got to the door before you did. And then you got to go back to the drawing board again because of all of those different measures that's in place to make sure that you don't infringe upon somebody else's copyright.
Yeah. And, that's a very good point. With some of these technologies that are just coming out rapid fire, then, when you file your patent application, it doesn't get published for 18 months. So, somebody else might already have their patent application in there that you're just not aware of. You come out with a new product, and then, 6 months later, their patent grants, and all of a sudden you're infringing, and you had no idea it was out there because it hadn't published yet. It wasn't publicly available. So even if you did a search, there was no way that you could have known about it. And so, sometimes it just happens.
So the big term today in 2025 so far is AI, right? How is AI in the counterfeit and AI in the IP space? What have you heard about AI and how can you use it? Tell me about it.
Yeah. So as far as, getting your own patents or trademarks or any intellectual property for something that came from AI, the USPTO is a little leery on how much you can use it. They really want to see that it was a person who developed the invention. For a patent, you can use some AI, but it really needs a actual human has to be the person who really contributes a lot to the idea. And so, there's not like a set rule on, it has to be 65% or 80. It's kind of a fluid test, but, if you come up with an idea solely using AI, you're not going to be able to get a patent on that. And copyright as well. So that's something that's been interesting as far as like software is concerned. A lot of coding now is done by AI. You tell it what you want the software program to do, and the AI can just code that for you. Whereas it used to be a person doing it, so you would already have a copyright on that, and it would automatically, usually employment agreement would automatically assign that copyright to the company. Now, so then if the coder left the company, they couldn't just copy the code because the company already had a copyright on it. Now with AI, if somebody's just putting all that into AI, getting the software code from there, and there's not really anything that would prevent the person who leaves the company. There's nothing that would prevent them from just copying that code.
Yeah. And it's getting real tricky now, right? So this is why I'm a big fan to the people listening. Make sure you do the foundational stuff correct, because the research, the pilings, the differentiation. I mean, I'm sure you've run into all types of products and all types of electronics and all types of auto part stuff that really has to be done properly and made sure that you have somebody trusted enough to do it right for you and consult you back and forth, which Mario does.
Yeah.
To make sure that when you go through this whole process, as painstaking as it may be, because we're in a very big rush society now, we want everything yesterday.
Yeah.
You don't want to get to the end of that track and then all of a sudden realize you got to start over as best as possible. It happens, but as best
Yeah.
as possible. Talk to a little bit about that if you can.
Yeah. So yeah, you want to, like you said, get everything done and get it filed right away. But the more we can take our time and like think about, okay, this is what the product does today, but what's the product going to do tomorrow? What are your competitors doing? Let's talk about, when your competitors see what you're doing, how are they going to try and compete? Are they going to try and make something faster, more features? Are they going to try and make it cheaper? When we can take a holistic view of what you're doing and what your competitors are doing, now we can really start to build in options for how we're going to, craft your patent application and make sure that we can, not only do we capture what you're doing, but we cast a wide net around what you're doing to make sure that nobody can come close.
And I think that the importance of that is I can't stress enough. Make sure you do it right the first time. And I think that a lot of times people want to take, they spent so much time in the back end and so much time doing all the little details. It's sort of like we do in business. Ultimately, you're in a position where you worked so hard on something that you just want to get it out and tell the world, but
Yeah.
it just may not be ready to cook yet.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, we have strategies like, if you're developing, don't wait until you get 2 years into development. Talk to your attorney every 6 months, and we'll file a provisional application. And then, another 3 months later, we can file another provisional application. And so that way you don't have to wait until the whole thing is complete. You can keep filing as you go. And then, that way you can start to disclose some of the features of your products rather than having to wait until the whole thing is done.
That's a great piece of advice. That's a great piece of advice, actually. I didn't even think about it that way in terms of piecemealing it along the way, just to make sure if you hit any bumps, you don't have to go too deep before you do it.
Yeah.
And I think that, all right, so I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. As we close out the show, give me tips in the counterfeiting space, even if it's what we already talked about. Give tips people can walk away with and remember.
Yeah. So number one is make sure you have intellectual property to protect your devices or inventions. That's going to be the biggest thing. Once you have intellectual property, that's your enforceable rights. Make sure, try to find where the counterfeit is most likely to occur. If it's going to be imported, make sure you are familiar with the ITC process, and that way they can prevent it for you. And constantly monitor for infringement of your goods. Ultimately, preventing that counterfeit is going to fall on the company. Make sure that you're aware of what's going on. So you want to patrol sites where that could occur: eBay, Amazon, any online marketplace.
Wow. And that takes a lot of research, right? Which is why you need somebody like Mario in place to keep an eye on that stuff for you.
Absolutely.
Anything else you want to tell the audience before we take off for this episode?
If you need any help with finding the right path on how to protect your inventions or finding these types of counterfeiters, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk.
And you can see him at Mario. You can see Mario at milanoip.com and ask him any questions, fill out the forms. If you have any questions in the chat or you want to add it to the chat, we'll follow it and we'll get back to you as fast as we can. I'm Craig Andrews. This is Mario Milano. Please, by all means, secure your creations from the Secure Your Creations podcast. And we'll talk to you guys next time.
Thanks.